folks, you are in for, I show them the best you've got. I'm telling you, they're just going to blow them away.
Well,
Okay, here we go.
I'm going to share screen because I've prepared a PowerPoint. So if you could please let me know when you see my screen. This is the location where these shots were fired from. Now, one thing that not a lot of people, I think, is aware of is, according to James Files, on the morning of the murder of Marilyn Monroe, he has, by the way, a very rare photo of Marilyn Monroe and JFK together. But on the morning of when she died, he drove Chucky Nicoletti together with some other people that, according to Files, were the ones that carried out the assassination of, or the murder of Marilyn Monroe. He drove Chucky and these other people to the airport where they flew down and took care of Marilyn Monroe. But that's another presentation. I'm just showing the possible connections with other assassinations. And Johnny Rosselli was a very close friend of Sam Giancana as well, the Chicago mob boss, who later, when more and more became revealed about what was actually behind the JFK assassination, he was called to be interrogated before the House Select Committee of Assassinations. But just before that, he was assassinated in his home. He was shot by somebody who knew him very well in his own kitchen. And according to Files, who followed the car, he saw that evening, by coincidence, he saw a car drive to Giancana's home. He followed the car since he recognized the people driving, and Johnny Rosselli was the one that went in there. And so according to him, he's convinced that it was Rosselli that actually was the one that took out Giancana. And then later, it was Johnny Rosselli's his turn to end up as fish food, this time chopped up and in a barrel at sea. So very, very brutal endings to these people as well. But Rosselli as well was in the Daltex building. Another person in Operation 40 with a high up position was a man by the name of David Sanchez Morales. Very, very brutal. He was the top hit assassin in South America for many years. Very, very feared, an alcoholic, and with a ferocious temper. I believe that he was the one that was driving around in possibly Ruth Payne's car.
I agree, because I recognized him. I'd like to add here, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but you can't see the scar in the HSCA photo they had, so I didn't realize it was the same man. But I met that man at David Ferry's when they were splicing the film. He had this big scar, because I didn't see the scar. You can't see it on this photo. I didn't realize it was the same guy. Then later I found a photo just a few months ago. That's why I'm so excited about this. And you're absolutely right. He was the one that drove, I believe, that drove the car. But for sure, I saw him in New Orleans with Lee at David Ferry's house. So, when they were splicing the film, that big scar. You just can't see the scar in this photo, so I didn't think it was the same guy. Okay, thank you. So I agree with you.
He had a big scar over the left eyebrow, and just before the shooting, people saw that a car identical to Ruth Payne's car was parked on Houston Street, right by the opposite the Daltex building, and at the corner of the Houston and Elm Street, on the wrong side of the street, where also this man is hanging to the light pole. This is an enlargement right at the time of the shooting, behind the motorcade. And I believe that this is David Morales. That David Morales was the one when people started seeing three people run out on three people run out on the back of the Texas School Book Depository, jumped into that car. I think he was the one that picked them up, drove them to the Cabana Motor Hotel, then came back and picked up Lee Oswald. And this is when Roger Craig and other people saw him being picked up by this big black guy. But David Morales, this is the location where the car was parked, and also when Robert Kennedy was killed several years later, there were people that recognized David Morales at the Ambassador Hotel that evening, together with two high-ranking CIA officers, Gordon Campbell and George Gionides. And so these people, you will see, they come again and again, the same people appearing in. Two other people that are key in this assassination as well was the Novo Sampaio brothers. Not that they were, I don't think they were part of the hit itself, but they were part of transporting weapons from Miami to Dallas for this hit. They were in two cars, and you had Laurent and Marita Lawrence, you had Frank Sturgis, Pedro Diaz-Lanz in these cars, all of them from Operation 40. And also they had a prostitute called Rose Charmaine, and she's the one that is being thrown out of the car in the, you will see that in the beginning of the JFK movie by Oliver Stone. She's the woman that is being thrown out of the car, who comes to the hospital very almost unconscious on some kind of drugs, trying to warn them and say they're going to kill Kennedy, they're going to kill Kennedy. She was later killed in a hit-and-run accident. I don't think accident, I think she was silenced. But these brothers were just unreal because, for instance, when Che Guevara, who was Fidel Castro's second-hand type person, when he was holding a speech at the United Nations, they tried to shoot at the building with a bazooka. And they were involved in so many different violent, crazy stuff. Very brutal people. Another member, Judith, that you know is Gary Henning, who was a very, very big guy and a soldier of fortune. And I believe that he was on location as well, indeed, because of this day. You will see here, this is also behind the motorcade on Houston Street. And when you make a facial comparison, I think this is the guy in the background. I believe he was standing there.
They brought a lot of these people in so that I think as not only witnesses, a lot of these people hated Kennedy. They really hated him, and any of them probably would have wanted to pull the trigger. And by having them all show up, it's really hard to tell who might have pulled the trigger, and that confuses everybody. So then you have all kinds of theories about who was involved.
Another man that I believe was involved was on the 6th floor of the school book depository, where witnesses saw 3 different people. And one of them, in my opinion, was a man by the name of Arminio Diaz Garcia, a former assassin. He was a former bodyguard for Santos Traficante, very violent guy as well, who was part of many different operations. And he was up on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. He was there together with Eladio Del Valle, who was also part of Operation 40, a former agent from Cuba who were involved in the assassination and who died on the very same day as your friend David Ferry. He was brutally murdered, absolutely slaughtered afterwards. There were so many people, and they were standing, I believe, Eladio Del Valle, Arminio Diaz Garcia, and then the last of the 3 on the 6th floor there was either Richard Kane or Mac Wallace, either of these 2 people. And I believe the way they got down from the 6th floor was through the elevator shaft that, if you remember, the electricity had been cut just a minute or so before the motorcade arrived. I believe that was the reason they did that, to make sure that the elevator wouldn't be moving. And so the way that they got down there without being noticed in the staircases or anything, and then running out on the back of the building, being picked up by David Morales, I think they were abseiling inside the elevator shaft. And possibly that Lee's task was to make sure that nobody interfered, because when he was in the lunchroom, he was very, very close to where the elevator door was. That is just speculation, but it's what I believe. Another person in Operation 40 was this very extremely brutal man called Dr. Death. His name was Orlando Bosch Avila. He was a dentist officially, but I've just gathered a few details here. These are bomb attacks that he was sentenced for. If you can see here, bomb in suitcase sent to Havana, bomb attacks in different American department stores, bomb outrage in Mexican consul. Check out all the different dates. This is 68 in England, USA, Cuban headquarters, British vessel in Mexico, Puerto Rico, Polish vessel in USA. I mean, they even blew up a big airliner here, more in Canada, Argentina, Peru, Mexico, Madrid. These are things that he has been sentenced for, so it's not only speculations, but what he was sentenced for. Venezuela, Jamaica, Colombia, you name it. So please keep that in mind when you see nowadays when this alleged terror are happening in many different countries and you think, oh, it can never be connected. I tell you, it can very well be. And then in the end, when Orlando Bosch was arrested by the police in Costa Rica, he was accused of planning the murder of exiled Chilean leader Andrés Pascal Allende. When he was taken and put in prison, he was helped out by a man called Otto Reich, who worked very close to George Herbert Walker Bush, and then this guy was pardoned. Go wonder. Here's some more. I mean, you can see these are very, very beautiful people. And I believe that he was there as well, standing right behind another one of the shooters that very few people know about. But Frank Sturgis, I don't know, did you ever meet Frank Sturgis?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I heard about it, but I heard his name is Fiorini, is what I heard, you know.
Yeah, exactly. But if you look at here, I've written Frank Fiorini Sturgis.
Yeah. Fiorini
was his real name, and Sturgis, I think he took after his stepdad. Here he was close to Fidel Castro on Cuba, but then he felt betrayed, he left, and then he became he hated Fidel Castro for the rest of his life. And he was involved in many brutal attacks as well. But as so many of these other operatives, they keep a very low profile. And I tracked down his house in Miami. It looks very, very normal, I would say. But and I believe I've never been able to definitely pinpoint him, but I believe he might have been the one underneath this. What do you call it, stone drain, one of the shooters down there. Because I know that Jimmy Files said that he saw him just minutes before, or some 10 minutes before the hit itself, that he was on the grassy knoll walking around there. And he was involved in many other things, among one of them where he was officially accused was being part of blowing up an airplane in Portugal, where the Portuguese Prime Minister, as well as Defense Minister, both of them were blown up in this plane, happened in Lisbon. And so these people are being sent right in many different countries, too many different countries and different continents and so on, being used to take out people. That's their business, and that's what they get paid for. Another member of Operation 40 was Bernard Baker, a close friend of E. Howard Hunt, which I mentioned before. And he is also, this is from the JFK movie by Oliver Stone, when Beverly Oliver and other people were running up the grassy knoll, trying to go behind the picket fence. They were stopped by a person with a Secret Service ID saying, back up, we got everything under control. And he's been identified by, I think, Gary Hemming and other people as Bernard Barker. He was also one of the so-called burglars or the plumbers at the Watergate burglary, which most of them were a part of Operation 40 as well. So if you keep in mind that Richard Nixon was part of creating this whole thing, he was the one that Dwight Eisenhower gave the task to create this whole thing. So he used these people, or they were following his career as well. And this is the area where Bernard Baker was at the time of the shooting. Now, we were talking about Felix Rodriguez before, and he and David Morales, the man with the scar, they also were given the task to track down Che Guevara, who was Fidel Castro's second in command, and they managed to get hold of him and catch him down in Bolivia, where they executed him. And it's said that Felix Rodriguez was the one that killed him. Felix Rodriguez said that it was a Bolivian soldier, but other people who know what actually happened say that the real killer was David Morales, the man with the scar again. They cut off his hand to send to Fidel to prove that he was actually dead, and so very brutal. And here we have Jimmy Files, who we're going to see he was not only the shooter at the picket fence, behind the picket fence, but he was also involved in other stuff, among them delivering the explosives to what was called the hit at the Embassy Row in Washington, D.C., where a Chilean exiled politician by the name of Orlando Lettier was blown to smithereens by Files and members of Operation 40. Files wasn't there, but he was there delivering the explosives from the Dominican Republic. And this is where Files were, behind the picket fence when he was shooting. So there are other people here also. We got the so-called Umbrella Man, who I believe was there not because it was raining, not because there was any poisonous dart in his umbrella or anything. He was just there to mark the cross point where everybody should start shooting, because you can't have multiple shooters around this little plaza firing randomly and then blame it on one shooter. It had to be everybody shoots at the exact same time, and that was the reason for him being there. So that they even painted the curbs of Dealey Plaza, where Beverly Oliver's, she still had yellow paint on her shoes, and that was also, I believe, to mark the death zone. You are allowed to shoot within this area, not before, not after. And the man in front of him, who is also very interesting, I believe, is a man from Operation 40 as well, by the name of Felipe Vidal Santiago. Now, this is the location where they were standing, and I believe that one of the tasks that Felipe Vidal Santiago was given was to step out in the street and try and slow down the motorcade. You can see that he's got one foot in the street and he's sort of waving, but he's sort of a bit blocking the motorcade as well. He later went under the name of Charles Morgan, and he was working for ITT, but his real task was to go from country to country and recruit patsies and assassins for many different hits. And in Sweden, 23 years later, he was actually in Sweden trying to recruit a former soldier of fortune by the name of Ivan von Birchen. He offered him 1 million Swedish krona to be part of taking out the Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme. So here we have a direct connection between Dealey Plaza and the murder of the Swedish Prime Minister as well. Just one of many. Once again, I've described many of the things I'm talking about in this book, Coup d'etat in slow motion. Another man that was part of Operation 40, his name was Jorge Mas Canosa, and he was a military guy who kept a very low profile. He was involved in a lot of secret ops, and later he was advisor, close advisor to Ronald Reagan, to George Bush Sr., and to Bill Clinton, here with Evelyn Rothschild. So very high up there, giving advice on a high level in international affairs. So from just being a team of assassins, they have made their way up there, and all the time side by side with George Bush Sr. After the assassination as well, when the Vietnam War started by Lyndon Johnson signing the order, more or less, even before JFK was buried, several of them moved to Vietnam. Ted Shackley was one of the people deeply involved in what was called Operation Phoenix, which was a mass extinction program in Vietnam where they killed thousands and thousands of so-called Viet Congs. Ted Shackley was there, and also one man that we're going to see, William Colby. And another one, Felix Rodriguez, was also there. Many of the same people from Operation 40 was in Vietnam as well. When we move forward time-wise, another member in this group, Operation 40, his name was Edward P. Wilson, and years later he was accused and sentenced for having sold 20 tons of C4 explosives. 20 tons of, that's 20,000 kilos of C4 explosives to Libya, to Gaddafi. That's more or the same amount as the domestic use of explosives. So it was an incredible amount. And he was taken down, he was put away for a while there for that. That's just one of the things he was involved in. Then in 1973, several of the people in Operation 40 was down in Chile, where they were part of taking out the Prime Minister Salvador Allende, where they attacked the palace where he was. He tried to defend himself, but there was a military coup that was organized by the CIA with Henry Kissinger in the background. And in the end, it said that Salvador Allende committed suicide. But Jimmy Files says that he was actually there and saw the whole thing happen, together with other people in Operation 40, being very active in this operation as well. In the middle picture, down in the below, you will see Salvador Allende together with Nobel Peace Prize winning poet Pablo Neruda, who was also assassinated the very same year by a man who was connected to Operation 40. But what happened after this whole military coup was that the so-called Operation Condor started, where there was a genocide committed in South America, where they tracked down everybody that was against or left-wing thinkers, were jailed, tortured, murdered, executed. Horrible stuff happened down there. And quite a few of the people from Operation 40 was down there training the local police and military in everything from torture methods to executions to you name it. Very, very brutal thing. And one of the persons who were down there training these death squads and so on was this man, one of the three so-called tramps from Dealey Plaza. His name was Charles Frederick Rogers, who, what his task was that day, I'm not totally sure about. I think he was the man in the railroad outfit next to the so-called Batchman. The Batchman's real identity was Lucien Sarti, who was in a Dallas police uniform. But Charles Frederick Rogers had a very strange life afterwards. That he was part of setting up James Earl Ray, who was the patsy for the killing of Martin Luther King. He was driving up and down to Mexico and Canada together with him. And later, he disappeared, and his parents' bodies were found chopped up in a freezer, and he left the U.S. It's said that he did it. I'm not sure what happened, but he disappeared, And the last thing I heard of him, he was down in these South American countries working for and educating these death squads in the schools of Americas is one of the places. But I think he was killed down there. A very, very brutal individual. And to the left of him on this little photo, the tall tramp there, that's actually Charles Harrelson, the actor Woody Harrelson's father. And the small tramp was Chauncey Hope, CIA operative. Now, the Watergate scandal was actually carried out by 4 of the members of Operation 40. Bernard Baker and the other one, Sturgis, was there. E. Howard Hunt, he was not on location, but he was part of the whole operation, and all of it ordered by Richard Nixon. I do believe, though, that the Watergate was actually an ambush and a coup d'etat to get rid of Richard Nixon with George Herbert Walker Bush in the background as the brain behind the whole operation. Another man in Operation 40 was José Dionisio Juárez Esquivel. He was also part of many, many very brutal murders, one of them of the blowing up of Orlando Lettier in Washington, D.C., this former politician of Chile. We have another man also, he was part of the exact same operation and also part of the Watergate. Then we have this man, José Sanguinis Perdomo. He was, for 10 years, he was one of the highest ranking officers within Operation 40. Now, in December 1980, at that time he was a nice looking older gentleman, and he was that exact day working extra as a doorman outside the Dakota building in New York. And he was standing to the left of the entrance, the exact position where shots were fired, killing John Lennon. It is blamed on Mark Chapman, but I tell you, when you look into the forensic evidence, absolutely no way could Chapman have done it. The shots came from where José Perdomo was standing. So I ask you, how big are the chances that one of the most skilled assassins in the US history was standing at the exact position where shots were fired, killing John Lennon, and that he was just there working extra that evening? I don't believe so. He was actually the guy also that is said to have run over to Mark Chapman and taken the gun from him. I think what he did was he ran over there and got Chapman's prints on the gun instead, and then triggered him as a patsy. Another man, very, very, very brutal man in this Operation 40 was a man by the name of Luis Posada Carillas. And he was involved with Felix Rodriguez and many others from Operation 40 in so many different of these operations in many, many different countries, especially in the Caribbean and down in South America. And I believe if what I found out is true, then he was the one that led the attack of Bob Marley, where shots were fired into his kitchen. It hit his wife, it hit his manager. He was hit as well in the arm, but survived the whole thing. Later then, he was, after this attack, Bob Marley was being guarded very closely by people on Jamaica. And until one day when there was an American filmmaker who approached him and said that they would very much like to make a documentary about his life. And Bob said, well, sounds interesting, let him in. So he invited him in, and they sat down talking. And Bob Marley was a very fit guy. He was very much into football, and he loved jeans and cowboy boots. And this filmmaker had with him this day a pair of cowboy boots as a gift to him. So Bob was very, very excited. I know people who were there, they have described it to me, and they said that he took one of the boots, and when he put it on, suddenly he cried out of pain, took out the boot again, and they found a copper wire inside the boot that had punctured his big toe. That toe is where Bob Marley later created a very, very serious case of cancer. And it was that cancer that slowly killed him. So the filmmaker who gave him the boots were actually the son of William Colby, the director of the CIA. So is that a coincidence?
The son of the director of the CIA, Colby.
Oh, Colby's son.
Yeah.
He was assassinated too.
Yeah, and here we go with incidents of cancer that you can't explain, you know.
We have another guy here, Barry Seal. He was the pilot of one of the pilots in Operation 40, but later very deeply involved in the so-called Iran-Contra Scandal, where weapons from the National Guard were stolen and then sent down in military aid planes, big C-130s, and so on, flown down by Barry Seal. And my friend Chip Tatum is another guy who was flying these weapons down there. And then instead they were exchanged for raw cocaine and transported back into the US in coolers, for the pilots, like Chip, thought that they were blood plasma and so on, but actually it was raw cocaine. And the guy in charge for this whole operation was Oliver North, who built up what they called the Enterprise. Here we have him, very deeply involved in extreme criminality, together with George Bush Sr. and Bill Clinton, who was the ones that personally received the drugs many times in airports like Mena, Arkansas, among others, where they were filmed by Chip and other people. Felix Rodriguez was also one of the key people in the whole Iran-Contra scandal with this weapon in and out. Here, Barry Seal, to protect himself, he installed cameras in his own plane. And you can see here, this is a photo taken from inside his plane where they're unloading or loading drugs. And in the image you have Pablo Escobar as well, the narco kingpin. Now, another guy who was very closely associated to Operation 40 was Michael Vernon Townley, who was a top assassin, and who was under the, if you remember, his controller was David Atlee Phillips. Now, Michael Vernon Townley he did not take part of the hit in Dealey Plaza. The day before he left, for some reason, I don't know why, but instead he was relocated and then used in many different locations. One of the murders that he's been proven to have taken part of was the murder of Robert Smith in South America. He also dressed up as a doctor and injected Pablo Neruda, the Chilean poet who won the Nobel Peace Prize in literature. He poisoned him or gave him an injection, so he died. He was also in the car behind when they detonated the bomb where Orlando Lettier, the Chilean exiled politician, was in, together with his staff member, Ronnie Moffett. Now, Michael Van Townley also worked together with an Italian guy called Stefano Della Chiai, who has been called the Night of Terror, or the I don't know how to translate it, but his life is like a dictionary when it comes to terrorism globally. And he was one of the key people in blowing up the train station in Bologna in Italy. He was also on location together with Michael Townley in Sweden the day when Olof Palme was killed, both him and Stefano Della Chiai. And one very strange thing about Stefano Della Chiai, who was, he's been involved in hundreds and hundreds of different alleged terror attacks, but now you can find him as one of the members in the Committee of 300, together with royalties and many, many top people in the world. A very occult society, and I find it very strange that he is there as well. So Barry Seal, the pilot, they've just been making a film with Tom Cruise playing Barry Seal, And he was just in a process where he was going to testify against George Herbert Walker Bush for his involvement in the whole thing. He was being pushed into a situation where he couldn't get away anymore. And then instead he was executed in his car. They say that it was by other drug cartels in Colombia that came up and killed him. But actually Chip Tatum, the CIA whistleblower, overheard when Oliver North gave the order to take out the Barry Seals. And then just 1 week later, Olof Palme in Sweden was also killed, where the connection with Oliver North that had just been there, with George Bush and so on, many of these connections are there that I also present in my book, Coup d'etat in Slow Motion. And Chip Tatum, I have an interview here with him where he talks about the Olof Palme hit, how Oliver North went over there to try and persuade him to sign some what is called user certificates for some stinger missiles, but where Olof Palme absolutely refused, gave him a finger and threw him out. And at that time, according to Chip Tatum, he signed his own death warrant. Another member of Operation 40, his name was Porter Goss, and he later became the director of the CIA. I mean, what a career, coming from an assassin, exiled Cuban, and then woof, all the way up to the director of the CIA under George Bush Jr. You can hear him. They were actually on 9/11. He was being interviewed, and while being interviewed, you can hear one of the explosions in the background, where it's very strange though, because when you look at his involvement in 9/11 and what actually happened in 9/11, he had the very same time when the attack happened, he was having breakfast. He was eating breakfast together with a Pakistani general called Ahmad Mahmoud, I believe his name was. And that man has been accused of having transferred $100,000 to one of the alleged attack. Atta. So what are the chances of them being involved in this? And when you look at what we're facing nowadays with these, all of these alleged terror attacks and many of them mass shootings in the US, if I'm correct, after almost 30 years of investigation looking into these things, I believe that a lot of it is carried out by what is called Operation Gladio, which is a network of a secret ghost army created by all the different NATO member countries, where, like I mentioned before, I believe my dad was part of building up the Danish version, but over the years it turned from being a defense tool into being used by the CIA according to what they call the strategy of tension, where the idea was to inflict fear through random violence on normal society, especially in countries with a lefty government, so that they would scare the living bejesus out of normal people because the violence was always random, and then make the population accept more and more militarized control, more and more surveillance, more and more giving up the civil rights, the liberal rights, and so on. Many of the terror attacks, or the alleged terror attacks that have happened here in Europe, where I have dedicated a major part of my life trying to expose these things. So it's through the fear, and it's very important that it's a random violence, because otherwise we wouldn't be affected, we wouldn't feel so threatened by it. And it's all built on the old Roman template: problem, reaction, solution. The elite few, the few in power, secretly create a problem. The reason they create that is this. Normally these days, this problem is in the form of a bomb attack, a terror attack, a mass shooting, a virus scare, a financial crash, something like that. The reason for that is that they want us, the normal people, just to go into absolute fear mode, a total reaction without thinking, so that we react out of fear instead of taking a step back, think, and then act. No, they want a total like this. And so they aim for women and children mostly to get the emotional thing going. And then when we're totally freaked out, we turn towards the ones that we think are there to protect us, that we have elected to protect us, not understanding that it's actually them who have created the problem, saying,
So they
please
accumulate
help
power.
us, help
You're,
us.
you're saying they
And-
accumulate power.
And then the ones in power who secretly created the problem said, well, the only way we can protect you with this horrible problem is, and boom, in comes the solution. And the solution every single time is more and more militarized police, more and more centralized power, more and more surveillance, more and more cameras, more and more control system, you name it. It's for your protection. But this is what a false flag is, where the attacked one is actually the attacker. That's the whole thing, a psyop, where the attacked one is actually the attacker. So this is what we're looking at today, big time, with all of these mass shootings that I tell you are not carried out by lone crazy guys like Lee Harvey Oswald or young patsies. Absolutely not. They're carried out for you to give up your guns in the US. That's why the mass shootings are more or less only in the US. The reason why they're in schools and high schools is because to get the emotional thing going, women and children most of the time, teenagers. And here in Europe, we have more, it's terror attacks instead, but it's only in NATO countries, and it's a circular motion. They're just doing it over and over again to get us in a constant fear mode so that we will not react and stop these very brutal limitations that are being taken in our lives. And now, if you haven't noticed, the last 6 months, the censorship is just going skyrocketing, where people are being shut down right, left, and center. The YouTube channels, their Facebook pages, the payment systems. My website has just been shut down. We've been working on it for 5 weeks to get it back up. It's right now ready to go live again. But it's just incredible, the censorship and the laws that are coming forward. Like for instance, in a few weeks in Denmark, they have a law suggesting that you can be sentenced up to 12 years in prison if you criticize NATO. If you only criticize NATO. This is in Denmark. It's bizarre times that we're entering, and I believe extremely important that we do something about it, that we wake up and smell the coffee, see what's going on, and just say, absolutely no way is this okay with us, and then do what we can to transcend the whole thing and stop it.
Thank you so much, Oleg.